Welcome to the Veritas Forum, engaging university students and faculty in discussions about life's hardest questions and the relevance of Jesus Christ to all of life.
I'll start off by saying, the labels that I would put on my worldview. I am a scientist, as you probably guessed from my intro. I'm also a Christian. And I'll spend some of my time this afternoon discussing how those two aspects of my worldview interact with each other. But before I do, I would like to lay to rest what I think is one very popular misconception about the way that science, in particular Christian faith, interact. And that is the idea that science and faith conflict primarily at the level of observable facts. The perception seems to be that there's sort of some master list of measurable phenomena, things like the age of the Earth and the evolution of species and whether the Earth revolves around the Sun or the Sun around the Earth. I could go on. These are all things, in some cases we haven't made the observations directly, but they're all things that we could observe or could have observed. And the perception is that the difference between science and faith is just a question of which description of events you hold to be true. Unfortunately, this is not an accurate characterization either of science or of Christian faith. You see, Christian faith doesn't involve endorsing some creed about observations about the created universe. Rather, the role of faith is to help us figure out what to do with our observations. Likewise, science is more than just observable facts. Henri Poincaré said it best when he said, "Science is made up of facts. Just as houses are made of stones, science is made of facts, but a pile of stones is not a house, and a collection of facts is not necessarily science." Because science is not simply a catalog of facts about the physical world around us. Science is a way of us interpreting that world, giving it meaning, giving it form, giving it shape. And so science and faith are both about interpreting evidence. And the interpretations of science and faith typically coexist. Sometimes they cooperate, sometimes they are in tension, but they coexist one beside the other. Let me give you an example. You might ask me, "Troy, why is your shirt purple?" And I might say, well, I could give you one scientific explanation of that. I could say, well, my shirt is purple because there is a high concentration of 6,6-dibromo indigo in the fibers that were used to weave my shirt. I could go and give you a scientific test of that explanation by trying to remove the dye from the shirt and showing you that it turns white afterwards, which would constitute a molecular explanation for why my shirt is purple. I could offer you an alternative explanation, which is my shirt is purple because my wife thinks I look quite nice in purple. These are two explanations of the same phenomenon. Neither is wrong, but neither is exclusive of the other interpretation. And the interpretations offered by science and faith coexist in precisely this way. To give a less flippant example, we could ask a question like, why do bacteria have flagella? And one explanation of that would be that bacteria have flagella because of an evolutionary process. First, the secretory system evolved, followed by the development of the protoflagellar filament, which was then followed by the development of the eubacterial flagellum that we all know today. Or maybe some of us don't know it, but another explanation would be that bacteria have flagella because God wanted them to be able to swim. These are coexisting explanations of the same phenomenon with different layers of meaning. And for me, these two methods of interpretation provide the most meaningful way of answering the key question that I have about the universe, which is, what about me? Where do I fit into the universe? What is my role to play? And this is a question that science by itself is ill-equipped to answer, because science is based on the idea of objective truth. And as a result, it can never lead to any kind of truth that addresses me as an individual, because objective truth says that truth exists as an object that exists separate from its observation by the observer, namely me. And I am then the subject, and the truth is an object. Therefore, by definition, science divorces truth from the truth seeker. In one of the most wonderful passages of Scripture, Jesus taught his disciples, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." By contrast, the promise of modern science is the somewhat more mundane. You shall know the truth, and the truth will probably not have any perceptible impact on the way you choose to behave. because scientific truth is out there and I am over here. And what I need is a truth that has the power to change the way I behave because I am not perfect. Now, I know many of you are shocked by that because up to now you thought I was perfect. But unfortunately, I am not, and neither, to my mind, are any of my scientific or religious colleagues. And to my experience, this is the primary argument in favor of Christianity over and above any other framework of faith for making decisions. Because Christianity gives us not only a framework for making decisions about how we should behave, but it also gives us the means to act according to that framework. And the means is the person of Jesus Christ. Because as Christians, we're convinced that when we place our faith in Christ, then the person of Jesus, who was raised from the dead, comes to live in us. And fundamentally, what I believe in is Jesus' ability to change me, to change the way that I am. Let me explain to you why I think this is important. In junior high and high school, I was a geek. Now, I know, this is shocking. You're probably thinking, quantum chemistry professor at MIT, and you were a geek in high school? Get out of town. But it's true. In the social structure of my high school, there were the cool kids, and then there were kids like me. And I was one of the uncool kids who desperately wanted to be cool. And that didn't make me a very nice person, because I would shun all the people that I thought were lower on the social ladder than I was. All the other kids who didn't have enough money to buy all the right clothes, or all the other members of the chemistry Olympiad team who, in my opinion, were far nerdier than I was. And life outside of high school didn't really turn out any different for me. I just found myself replacing popularity with any of a host of other ultimate goals. Getting good grades, getting into a good college, success in my career, wealth, fame. And none of these made me a very good person. Because the problem isn't with high school or the popular kids or college or academia or money. The problem is me. The way that I am and the things that I want. And no matter how hard I try, I'm a good scientist, a passable engineer, but that's not a problem I can solve because I am the problem. And theistic naturalism, which would be my default position, doesn't really provide any help with this issue, because if God just set the universe in motion and then hung out a sign that says, "Be back in 25 billion years," then I'm stuck. Whatever I am is whatever I am. And most religions, to be honest, are even less help on this point, because they tie our acceptance by God to our performance, our ability to adhere to a certain set of rules or accomplish a handful of tasks. Only in Christianity does God provide the means to change who we are. Because morality in Christianity isn't something we do to suck up to God and prove to Him that we're so much better than all the non-Christians out there. In fact, morality in Christianity isn't a ladder that we ascend to draw close to God, because the narrative of Christianity isn't one of people ascending to get close to God at all. The narrative of Christianity is a story of God who came down to us in the person of Jesus. And to me, this inherently Christian, but also inherently scientific worldview provides the most satisfying means for me to understand the universe and also where I fit in that larger universe, in that big, sometimes scary universe. And so I look forward to hearing about some of my colleagues' worldviews, and I also look forward to discussing this with you. Thank you.
So, a Christian, a humanist, and a Unitarian walk into a bar. The barkeep's eyes widen and his brow furrows. He leans across the bar and says, "Hey guys, is this some kind of joke?" "Never mind," he says, "just kidding. You're going to the Veritas forum, aren't you?" "Just follow those three professors who just staggered out the door. They'll take you right there." Gentlemen, if Veritas eludes us here, we can go back to the bar and pursue it in vino. Next round's on me. As you can see, our commitment to the truth. runs deep. So the question before us today is whether faith is a friend or a foe of science. I have no interest in painting faith as a foe of any kind, just because I don't think that enmity is a good type of relationship to foster. But for me, it's a very real and very important question of whether faith is a true friend to humanity or whether it is a false friend to humanity. Now, the question is a hard one for me in part because, on the one hand, I'm a huge fan of reason as a philosopher. But I've also had a sort of a faith-related epiphany that changed my life in an important way. So for me, this is a very real issue. Now, I'm going to contend that beneath faith's friendly face lies what is in fact a false friend. Do I get extra points for alliteration, fellas? No? All right. So I've been asked to reply from the humanist point of view. Now, it's important to emphasize that there is no humanist party line. Humanists generally think we should inquire together as honestly and forthrightly as we can, let the chips fall where they may, and each of us exercise our own judgment. As a result, there are many different kinds of humanists. There are Christian humanists, there are Buddhist humanists, there are Jewish humanists, Muslim humanists, and atheist humanists. In fact, in our humanist community that we're growing here at Carnegie Mellon, we have Buddhist humanists, Christian humanists, and non-believing humanists who all get together on a regular basis to discuss profoundly important issues. And this is the kind of thing that I love to do and that I'm very grateful to the Veritas Forum for making possible. So there are three expressions of humanism that I'd like to share with you very briefly. Kurt Vonnegut, the novelist, wrote, he was a humanist, being a humanist means trying to behave decently without expectation of reward or punishment after you are dead. Probably my favorite expression of the humanist spirit, if you will, is from Thomas Paine, the firebrand who sparked the American Revolution. He wrote, "The world is my country, all mankind my brethren, and to do good is my religion." Amen, Brother Paine. My friend Greg Epstein is the humanist chaplain at Harvard University, and he's published a best-selling book titled Good Without God. And I think that title represents a very apt slogan, if you will, if you need to get a handle on the humanist point of view. I actually think that Greg soft pedals humanism a little bit because, in fact, most of the humanists I know think that it might very well be the case that we would be better off without God belief, and that we might very well be better off without faith, or at the very least that we should inquire openly and honestly into the possibility. For most of human history, my side in this argument could not be expressed explicitly without fear of repercussion. And so I'm, again, doubly grateful and applaud the Veritas Forum for making this kind of discussion possible. Now, this is a hard subject to think honestly and in a fair-minded way about. First of all, because all of the issues that evoke strong feelings in people, politics, religion, ethics, we know that when you feel strongly about something, that this changes your perspective and often makes it very difficult to see objectively. Scientists call it confirmation bias, and we're all prone to it, believers and non-believers alike. But I think the issue of faith raises especially important big obstacles to the problem of a fair and honest discussion. I'm going to illustrate this with a story. This is a true story. Just a couple of weeks ago, I arrived at my office to find a set of long, anguished voice messages on my answering machine. These were from a woman who was having some kind of identity crisis. She'd been raised a Christian. and she started having doubts in sort of midlife. And she went to her pastor, her minister, who kept telling her, "You've got to stop thinking about this or you're going to go to hell." Now, she couldn't do that. She couldn't stop thinking about it. And she concluded that she needed some philosophical counseling. And so she found me on the web and called me up and hoped I could help. What was interesting, I called her back and did my best to help her, making clear that I'm not in any way licensed as a counselor. But as a friend. What was really interesting to me was she said that every time, she said she couldn't help thinking about faith and whether God was real or not, but every time she did, she would be seized by this kind of panic that she couldn't control. Part of her early upbringing had actually short-circuited her capacity to think about reason and science in a way that made it impossible for her to think in a fair-minded way about it. I mean, her emotions would literally take over and prevent her from reasoning about it. Now, I'm not claiming that every religious believer is similarly disabled, but I think we ought to take seriously the possibility that an early exposure to ideas of heaven and hell can compromise your capacity to think in an honest and fair-minded way on this issue. Now, we know what fair-minded inquiry involves. It involves suspending judgment, doing your best to adopt a neutral standpoint, looking at the evidence that can be offered on one side and the other, the reasons that can be offered on one side and the other. And the last and key component is a willingness to submit to the outcome of the inquiry, whatever it happens to be. Now, scientists practice this discipline frequently, and it makes them very good at it. But they typically practice this discipline on matters of fact, issues having to do with the nature of the universe. Scientists can, of course, feel very strongly about their pet theories, but scientists don't often practice this discipline on ethical issues or theological issues or political issues where it's much, much harder to maintain a fair and balanced perspective. I don't want to use fair and balanced. That expression has been destroyed. So I've come to conclude, I've been teaching this issue for years and years, and I've come to believe that real wisdom on the question of faith comes from attending closely to the way it functions. Now, the official religious account, or Christian account at least, of how faith functions is that when a believer has faith, that this causes God to think differently about them, and God thereby stamps their ticket to heaven. That's sort of the causal chain that's the official cosmology of Christianity. And I'm actually quite astonished that anyone can claim to know that this is how the world works. How would we know that we can cause God to change the way we think about us in this way? I find that those who claim to know that this is how the world works, I find them guilty of a stunning lack of humility. This is the antithesis of the kind of epistemic humility that I think often characterizes scientific inquiry. Of course, not all believers claim to know that that's the way the supernatural order works. Some of them say, well, I don't know it, but I take it on faith. Of course, to make that claim in this context is to beg the question, is to argue in bad faith. Yikes. Okay. There's no question in my mind that faith can instill hope, bolster resolve, lessen anxiety, keep despair in check, and that it promotes any number of pro-social attitudes like trust and loyalty and commitment. Our use of have faith often produces that effect in people, and there's scientific evidence that supports the fact that it actually works. And I'm prepared to concede that the cumulative effect of many, many people urging one another to have faith is extremely, perhaps hugely beneficial, at least on one side of the equation. But there are secular alternatives to such talk. You can, instead of saying, God loves you, you can say, I love you, man. Right? Instead of saying, have faith, you can say, hang in there, buddy. Right? And these often have produced the same psychological benefits. I think the important thing here, I'm going to need an extra minute or two, and I'll wrap up. I think it's often hard for the faithful to acknowledge faith's dark side. I'm going to tell a little story here. About 100 generations ago, an ornery humanist by the name of Socrates concluded that we can best serve the cause of truth and the cause of human well-being by holding one another accountable for not just for our actions, but also for our beliefs. Now, this offended the religious sensibilities of the time, and he was condemned to death and executed. But his idea that we should hold one another accountable, not just for our actions, but also for our beliefs, has steadily modernized and humanized human existence for centuries, with about a 1,000-year detour through the Dark Ages, but let's set that aside. And nowadays, a doctor is expected, is not allowed to recommend a procedure unless he has a good reason. An engineer is not allowed to choose a building material for a bridge unless he has a good reason to think that it will withstand the stresses that it's likely to. If I cancel a picnic that you care about, I'm expected to provide you with a reason, right? In every area of our lives, we expect accountability from one another, except one domain: religion. Religion claims special exemption from this accountability to reason, and it becomes clear. In John, the book of John is written, "Blessed are they that have not seen and yet believe." The basic message here is, don't ask for a reason. Don't ask for me to be accountable for my religious beliefs. Just take it on faith. And if you actually look at the way the word faith functions in day-to-day discourse, this is how its primary usage: to exempt people from basic rational accountability. In fact, to celebrate faith is to deliberately refuse to be held accountable on certain, and not just any accountability. Well, perhaps there are forms of accountability in the religious domain that are different from the forms of accountability in science, but that has yet to be made explicit. My claim, my firm belief, is that the net effect of this excusing each other and excusing ourselves from rational accountability is hugely negative, and that the costs, in fact, far outweigh the benefits. I want to very briefly show you a slide that scientists have begun to look at this question seriously, and one of them, Gregory Paul, has found that in cultures that have a high degree of religiosity tend to be more dysfunctional. Crime is higher. Abortion rates are higher. Child mortality, infant mortality is higher. Divorce rates are higher. If, in fact, faith made us better people, you would find that in the data, but we don't. In fact, we find the opposite. Now, Steven Pinker has recently written a book loaded with evidence, where he, and one particularly striking set of findings is that in roughly the year 1700, about the time that Europe was entering a period of faith fatigue, about 100 years of religious warfare had torn Europe apart, and this skepticism about faith set in. And what happened during that 100 years that followed? There were dramatic declines in execution rates per capita, torture, murder, slavery, superstitious killing, war, despotism, and violence. All of these things dropped by significant factors because people started taking reason seriously and started questioning their faith. I'm going to end there.
All right. Good evening. I want to say two things to begin with. First of all, I'm new at this, so you have to bear with me. I'm not new at lecturing, but I'm certainly new at discussing these sorts of topics outside of a very small circle of confidence. So this is kind of new for me. The other thing that I want to say, which is actually really important, is I only know how to give one kind of talk, and it involves slides. So we're going to get some slides. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. I'm going to talk a little bit about Unitarian Universalism, because how many people know what that is? Wow, okay, well, that's about a third. That's a lot better than I would have expected. But I'll talk a little bit about that anyway. Then I'll talk a little bit about faith and science, and I'll talk about love and stories. Okay, so about me, I have a family. There's my family. As a statistician, the thing that I'm proudest of about my family is that if you did the regression analysis to predict height from body position, R squared would be just about 100% in this picture. Okay? I like music. And for a while, I was on a music service called Last FM, and it would do statistical analysis of your music preferences. And these are my music preferences. I'm right in the middle there, that red dot. But in fact, I really like music. So I play music as an amateur musician, and just sometimes I bring people into the room, and sometimes I clear them out. But it's lots of fun either way. And the other thing, I guess, is that I'm a statistician. So here's a talk that I gave. I guess the music came in a little bit in this talk. This was a talk about Bayesian statistics, which I actually gave at this church up a couple blocks from here on Morewood Avenue, which is the church that I normally go to. This is the Unitarian Universalist Church, the first Unitarian church in Pittsburgh. And I promised that I would talk a little bit about the Unitarian Universalist Church in the outline. So let me say that the UU Church is the merger about 1960, 1961 of two historically Christian denominations. It is now a liberal religious discipline not bound by any single creed, and it takes an extremely pluralistic approach to belief. So nowadays, if you do a poll among the Unitarian congregations, you'll find that about 20% of Unitarians self-identify as Christians. You'll find lots of people who are lapsed Christians, lapsed Jews, people who still retain their Jewish faith, who are Buddhists, who are believe in some vaguer form of monotheism, or are polytheists, atheists, agnostics. You'll find everybody at a Unitarian church, because the thing that binds Unitarians together is the notion of an individually constructed theology. That is to say, I construct my own theology in the context of a shared search for spiritual growth. And this is really what's attracted to me about the church. And if people ask me what church I go to, and I'm a Unitarian, and they know a little bit about the kind of belief salad in that church, they go, oh, that's just a social club, right? And that used to really bother me. But now, I think the right answer is, you bet. It is a social club. It's a social club of people who share heuristics about how to live a good life. And I think heuristics are about as much as we can have. And sort of those heuristics begin with the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Yeah, okay. There's another Unitarian here. I know that. That's about the right base rate for the population, actually. The two of us and the rest of you. As I said before, we prize free intellectual inquiry into spirituality, religion, theology, and we are committed, because it's a liberal religion, to social justice in the world. And I say, come on in, the water's fine. This is a very good place if you're interested, if you know faith and spiritual experience is important to you, but you don't exactly know how it works, this is a great place to learn about it, because you will find every possible influence there. But I want to turn to a different topic now. Percy Diaconis is a professor of statistics and mathematics at Stanford. He's actually kind of a cool guy. He used to be a professional magician before he was a faculty member. Actually, how many people play poker here? So do you know about how many times you have to shuffle a deck before it's random for the next hand? How many times you do the fan fold shuffle? 7 or 8. Yeah, and the reason you know that is that paper, Bayer and Diaconis. He mathematically proves that about 7 of those fan fold shuffles is what you need. But I'm going to talk a little bit about this other paper, Theories of Data Analysis from Magical Thinking Through Classical Statistics, where he talks about ways that statisticians and scientists try to make meaning out of data. So here's some data. We begin with natural or experimental data. Who knows what to do with that? Okay, well, a statistician, a scientist, will try to summarize that data in some way. And so here's the same data summarized in various ways. You didn't know this was a statistics lecture, did you? And we have, so clever summaries are a big deal. The summaries, the histograms and the numerical summaries aren't so useful, but that graph up there is kind of, that begins to get the interpretive juices going. And in fact, background information about what generated the data, our experience, and especially imagination and hunches. You can hardly not allow your imagination to draw a nice curve through that scatter plot, right? And that's part of data analysis, and that's part of making meaning out of raw data in science and statistics. But imagination and hunches, that doesn't sound very much like the scientific method. And in fact, Diaconis talks about this. This is kind of the magical thinking approach, or it's part of the magical thinking approach to data analysis. And he talks about another example of magical thinking, the cargo cults of the Pacific Islands that sprang up after World War II because the planes would land and leave food on the islands, to, maybe to convert the islanders to the U.S. cause, or because they needed to stockpile food there. And the islanders wanted the planes to come back, so they'd build fake planes and they'd build runways, but it never happened. That's kind of the magical thinking part. So that's a kind of a disinclination to revise beliefs based on interpretation and data. That could never happen in our culture, right? Well, not only does it happen here, and we encourage it, of course, but as a statistician, I work with scientists in many fields, in medical science, social science, and as soon as you have a result that looks like it's real, looks like it's significant, the interpretation, we're off to the races with interpretations. Whether those interpretations are right or wrong, that's a big part of making science work. So some of this has to be okay. And Diaconis talks about the idea that there really is a role for a controlled kind of magical thinking. To be a good scientist, you do have to use your imagination to explore, to think about what could be causing the things you see in the data. And it can even be useful to hold a belief past some initial disconfirmatory evidence, because that may be a long shot which eventually is confirmed, and that would be really important. Or it may be a mistake, like cold fusion back in the late 80s. But the process of proving that it's a mistake actually leads to new insights and new thinking about science. The trick is to know when to stop. And the main secret weapon of science is the disconfirming observation or the confirming observation. Get more data, see if the idea works, see how it compares to the data, and let's move on. Okay? Well, it isn't only Diaconis that's had these ideas. Maria Mitchell was an astronomer in the late 1800s. She was the first woman to discover a comet with a telescope. She actually was also a big women's suffrage. She fought for women's suffrage, and she was anti-slavery and a lot of other things. But here she says we especially need imagination in science. It's not all mathematics, nor all logic, but somewhat beauty and poetry. And that's definitely true. There's also a guy who worked at a post office who had some opinions about this. I am enough of an artist, said Albert Einstein, to draw freely upon my imagination. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. So certainly it's a part of science. And that's a kind of a sense in which faith in ideas, before they're fully confirmed or disconfirmed by data, plays an important role in scientific discovery and scientific learning. Thank you. I probably will go an extra minute too, but we'll see. But we should maybe be talking about faith with a capital F. So it's not just faith in my ideas as I'm looking at a small result in data analysis or something like that, but the bigger ideas that Troy and Andy have talked about. And so we can talk about different worldviews. And one faith worldview has kind of a personalistic God as a person, or as a kind of a super person in the universe. And there's a version of that where it's a loving God, and He has planned everything, and I have a purpose in God's plan. There are other worldviews that have kind of more diffuse idea of what the higher power or God is. So there's kind of a positive, diffuse view. There's a little bit more pessimistic, diffuse view. These are all worldviews that you could have about higher powers that are somehow, oh, look, see, even I know it's almost time. And another possibility is that there isn't a role for God in the universe, that the universe just happened. And science can help describe how it happened and why it happened and the cause and effect, but really can't talk about agents. Okay? Where are these things coming from? So what I want to do in the last minute or so that I'm going to take from Chris here is talk about what I think the motivations are. And here I'm way out on a limb. This is not statistics. This is kind of my own view based on observational evidence, I guess. Okay? So after we take care of our basic physical needs, I think a fundamental emotional need for human beings is to love and be loved. And I don't mean just carnal love or brotherly love. I mean love in a very general sense. I mean acknowledging and accepting one another, protecting one another, the pleasure of being a part of a group or taking someone into your group, trust, empathy, community, all of those things in kind of a general sense of love, which is actually really, really, really important. The other drive or the other need that I think is that as human beings we need to tell stories, and we need to be told stories. Stories are how we connect our imagination with the world, with meaning making, and with meaning telling. And in fact, there are philosophers, I'm sure many of you know, who believe that there is no me. There is really only the stories that I tell. And I think that extends across a lot of what, that explains a lot of how humanity works, I think. Those two. Then there's other drives too, but those are certainly important ones. So how do I think this works? As far as I've been able to tell, religious and spiritual experience are really bound up with our needs for love and storytelling, our needs for community, our needs to love and be loved either by each other or by God. This is absolutely fundamental. And storytelling, historical origin stories that tell us our place in the universe, other kinds of stories. These are really important, and I don't mean to trivialize them by calling them stories. These stories are a cultural vessel. They carry part of our cultural identity with us, and they can actually produce profound insights about how we should behave to live a good life, to live well. Science, on the other hand, is a method for producing a particular kind of story that's particularly useful, especially stories of cause and effect. And as I said before, it succeeds because of that secret weapon. Let's try this out, see if it works. Do we get confirming evidence or disconfirming evidence? It's been a tremendous accomplishment in human history, and it benefits us in every way. The benefits of science are all around you. Like using your phone to text answers when you're asked questions on the screen, welcome to science. Like eating Cheerios in the morning, welcome to the science of growing the corn and the oats that go into the Cheerios, that build the trucks that bring the Cheerios to your store, you name it. I mean, we live on science. It's incredibly important. So what about science versus religion? As a statistician, I'll say it depends. That's what,
There need not be conflict, I think, as Troy was saying. There are certainly ways of negotiating the science versus religion interpretations of the world. There are places where there can be conflict, and I think if one's faith precludes looking at evidence, then there definitely is a conflict between science and faith, between science and religion. And I think this is a point that Andy was making toward the end also. We have to look at the evidence of the world. When we do look at evidence, when we do look at what works and what doesn't work, as a rule, humanity moves forward. We have better lives. We have less bad things happen in the world, more good things happen in the world. We're more capable of doing things. And the times, I think, when science and faith conflict are exactly the times when faith precludes us from using that evidence to move forward in the world. I'll stop there. Thanks a lot.
I have asked our three participants now to address one or two points in the remarks of the other speakers with which they agree and one or two points with which they disagree. And we'll begin with Troy and Voorhis.
There we go. Now it's on. So maybe just so you know, we start off with the discussion rather than the debate. You know, we start off with the cons, then it automatically turns into sort of like, oh, well, let me defend my point. I'll just start off with some things that I liked, or things that not necessarily like agreed with or resonated with. So Andy, in your talk, when you were talking about how you sort of had this conversation with a woman who just was paralyzed with fear when she ever thought about the possibility of God not existing, and that she had been sort of had her ability to reason subverted at an early age. You know, I can resonate with that because I've met people in the same place because of the faith tradition, that however they've been brought up or mistreated. You know, and this is actually the basis of cults. You know, is the idea to take people when they're young and impressionable or at a weak place, subvert their ability to reason and rationalize for themselves, and just take that and turn it to your own selfish aims. And that certainly, I think, is something that is a worrisome thing to have happen. And I certainly that is something that some religious groups do, and it's certainly not something that I'm proud, as someone who would self-identify as being religious, not the aspect of religious groups that I'm proud of. But it certainly is something that I think both religious and non-religious groups, because to some extent, for the people, the outsiders, to try to police that and throw stones at it, it's like, oh, well, the religious groups can circle their wagons and say, oh, well, they don't understand. But I think within our own religious circles, this is something that we do need to police, to say, when people are being either lazy and not considering the issues, or encouraging other people to not consider the issues, like, I think the pastor's advice, if you need to stop thinking, that's terrible advice. It's the worst advice that I could imagine offering in that scenario. But I think that this advice does get offered in religious circles. So just stop thinking about that. It's not important, or it's just going to lead you down the path to destruction. I think we need to police, and when we hear those types of things being said, we need to say, no, that's not okay. That isn't the worldview that Christianity preaches. I mean, Galileo, who, despite his contentious relationship with the church, remained a Christian his whole life, and he said, I believe that the same God who endowed us with the ability to reason didn't intend us to forego its use. And so that's certainly my take on things. I really like the phrase you used about magical thinking, because certainly in science I see that happens in terms of the way that I practice science all the time. That in chemistry we call it chemical intuition. And for those of you who have taken chemistry exams and been frustrated by the fact that they tell you didn't have chemical intuition, that's wise, because it's just sort of this leap that you say, oh, well, I think it's going to be this. And you can't necessarily put all the pieces together about why you think that, but it really is extraordinarily important in science to have these sort of imaginative, epiphany type things where you think, oh, I'm going to go from what I know to something that I don't know, but I'm still very confident that where I'm going is right. And you're right, sometimes our intuition is actually not right. But without that sort of that feeling that we know we're right, or we're pretty confident that we're right before the evidence comes in, that's what actually motivates us to go get the evidence. If I was completely agnostic, I'd be very unmotivated. I would just feel like it was this dull exercise. Well, I don't know what the answer is. I'll just try this, and then I'll try this. Usually I have my money on one conclusion or the other as I'm doing the experiment. I try to still be unbiased, but I'm secretly hoping that the evidence will all turn out one way. So I'll stop hogging the floor.
No, thank you for that. Well, I guess I'll just try to reply to that.
Yeah.
I'm delighted to hear you say that the pastor's advice to stop thinking about it was terrible advice. I just wonder if I could encourage you to take the next step, because there are passages in the Bible that seem to say precisely this. So I read one of them where, blessed are they that believe without evidence or without seeing, right? This is the kind of saying that Christianity iterates again and again and again. In fact, think about the story of Abraham and Isaac, right? Here's the founder of the three great monotheisms held up as an exemplar of moral virtue. Why? Because his capacity to blindly obey God's command. He's willing to kill his own son. His faith is so strong, and this is held up as an example of how to be a good person. Why would you seek to why would you encourage people to venerate a book that has teachings like that in it? Just one other passage I'll mention. It's easy to, I think, say that the New Testament represents a significant moral advance over some of the stories of genocide and so on in the Old Testament, and I certainly believe that that's true. But there is one unforgivable sin listed in the New Testament. And that one unforgivable sin is to doubt the existence of the Holy Spirit, to think for yourself. The one unforgivable sin. Why not take the next step, Troy, and dissociate yourself from the things that are encouraging people to stop thinking?
Yeah, so I'll respond to that and just, so I would say that, my interpretation of some of those passages, I agree that sometimes the statement in John of, blessed are those who believe without seeing, can sometimes be used to encourage this sort of blind faith of, you just should have blind faith. I read that passage in context of, this was a passage that Jesus said after the resurrection to Thomas, who had doubted and said, okay, Thomas had to actually touch Jesus and put his fingers into Jesus' wounds and so forth. And Jesus said, okay, so now you believe. Somebody else who can believe without all of that's pretty lucky, because they didn't need, there's this sense in Christianity that faith is actually given by God, that the sort of, the ability to sort of see this is somehow a gift from God. And that when you get to that point where you're like, oh, well, Thomas got all of this, and then he believed, there's somebody else who's able to believe without having that. He's saying this is a blessing, not, oh, well, even if you don't believe and you have doubts, you should just suppress them and then you'll be blessed. It's more communicating the relationship between God and man and faith there. So I could go through the different passages and say why I think I wouldn't use those to say that the idea of faith in the Bible is to suppress questions or doubts. I guess I would instead hold up what I actually think faith in the Bible is used for, which is, to me, faith in the Bible is not actually this sort of post-Enlightenment idea of faith, of the lack of doubt, because there's clear examples of the Bible of the coexistence of faith and doubt, people who have faith and yet also doubt. In fact, most of the disciples are given as examples of people who had faith but also doubts. And the crucial element of faith biblically is the faith to act. To say, okay, I possess doubts. At some point, it becomes necessary for me to act, in life, and I make that decision by a step of faith. And that faith in Christianity is faith in Christ or faith in God or faith, it's something along these lines. But that is the biblical definition of faith to me. Is at some point I have to have the faith of jump or don't jump, step or don't step, and I can't not decide, because not deciding is deciding no. And so, for me, the encouragements and exhortations to faith are not exhortations to suppress reason, but exhortations to act when it is appropriate to act, even in the presence of doubt. Good, okay. So I guess I want to first respond to something that Troy said. In fact, it was very early in Troy's presentation. He talked about, I don't even remember what the example was. There was an example of a fact in which, or for which you gave both a faith-based interpretation and a scientific interpretation. And at first I resonated very much to that idea because I strongly believe that there are multiple ways of knowing. And that science is an incredibly important way of knowing. But there are ways of knowing or ways of deciding to act that are not scientifically based. And those ways really depend very much on faith. We don't have much else to go on but faith when we're outside of science. What troubled me and what I'm curious about is when I think about that and the way that I said that just now, faith versus scientific or logical reasoning apply in different domains, essentially domains where there isn't clear evidence and domains where there is clear evidence. But the example you gave was an example of interpreting the same piece of evidence in multiple ways. And I'm not sure I understand that. So it would be interesting to hear about that. Yes. So I have to tease apart the question. So sure. So you're sort of saying one worldview is faith in those situations where there isn't clear evidence, scientific reasoning in those situations where there is. Okay, right. So your example mush those together. Right. I think this relates back to something that I think you raised very well in your talk, which is the idea that in science there is still an element of faith, a different kind of faith. Right. I don't know that it's that different, but go ahead. Anyway, it may or may not be that different. But in any case, there is the idea, I mean, I guess, there's this, again, I think this is a misperception that maybe nobody in this room has, and I don't think anybody who is practicing scientists would have, but from the outside, a lot of people think that science provides a route to complete proof of a proposition. You gather enough evidence and it's completely impossible that the science would be wrong at some point. Which is just not true. Every scientific hypothesis is open to more testing, the gathering of more evidence, reevaluation, and possibly discarding of the conclusion after a certain amount of time, if enough contradictory evidence is brought in. So my point on both of those interpretations is that both of these are ways of drawing a conclusion in the light of incomplete evidence, and they also answer different questions you might have based on the incomplete evidence. So it is also related to what you said, which is that to some extent they exist in different spheres. That I wouldn't typically use faith to predict something that ultimately could be observed because I don't need to. It's not the role that faith plays. That's very much the point I was trying to make. The way in which the domains in which faith are useful are not the domains in which you're likely to be able to make a prediction. Yeah, scientific. I might not go so far as to say that it's completely impossible that they could come into conflict, but I would agree. Very unlikely. Yeah. I wanted to turn to something that Andy said. Actually, I think you said both of these things, and I'm curious, and I may be wrong about these two things, but at some point in your presentation, in fact, I remember it was the same point in the presentation. You said at one point, many humanists believe we would be better off without faith. And I think almost in the same breath you said many of those same humanists believe we would be better off without God. Without God belief. Okay. I actually, again, I want to try to tease apart those two ideas. I want to tease apart the concept of God belief from the concept of faith. Okay. Because in fact, as Troy and I were just discussing, in a general sense at least, we do need to act, we do need to do certain parts of what we do on faith, in the sense that we have to make decisions in situations where the evidence is not plausible. So, on the other hand, I certainly see a point of view that says belief in God is not useful, or belief in God has produced bad results in history, or something like that. And so I want to try to tease those apart and see if you agree that they can be teased apart, or if not.
It's certainly true that one can have faith in lots of there are many uses of the concept of faith that deal with worldly events. I can have faith in myself and in a job interview, and it'll improve my chances of getting the job, right? I can have faith in the friendliness of a gentleman I've never met before, and as a result, make a new friend. There are lots of, I mean, I think this is one of the ways the concept of faith is sort of two-edged. It functions in all kinds of positive worldly ways to promote trust and commitment and resolve and hope and all these good things. And I'm all for that function. I mean, human beings need hope and resolve and commitment and trust and loyalty, and we need to find ways to reinforce those. But I don't think it makes sense to conclude on the basis of that we need to make assertions about supernatural beings and what they want from us. But that's a whole, I mean, there are lots of ways to promote hope and loyalty and commitment and resolve without deluding ourselves about what things are like in another world that it couldn't possibly have definitive evidence about.
Any other pros or cons that you would like to address? We have a few more minutes in the schedule for that.
Yeah, I'll just say I definitely agree with both my co-panelists that there are times when it is permissible to act in the absence of definitive evidence. I'll just give you I'm going to tell a personal anecdote that I think illustrates this. This is the experience that convinced me that the world's faithful, that I'm sympathetic with their ends, not their means or the language they use to promote it. When I was in high school, I'll tell a high school story too. I was not a happy kid. I was geeky, also. Pretty low on the social hierarchy. Was not very happy. And the world seemed like a kind of a cold, unfriendly place. And a friend once pulled me aside and said, Andy, why do you always walk around with this grim look on your face? And I was like, I got no good reason to be optimistic, have hope. And she said, Andy, just try smiling more. Just try it. And my first reaction was, well, that would be dishonest. That would be expressing outwardly something I don't really feel inwardly. Fortunately, I overcame that resistance and just tried it. I tried smiling at people as they came down the hall towards me in my high school, and some of them started smiling back. And I can't tell you how this changed my outlook on life. I mean, in a sense, I was saved by this bit of advice, right? That was
Well, there's love for you. I mean, there's love.
It's love, but it was advice. Just smile is functionally comparable to have faith. Have faith that everything will work out all right. And it had a profound effect on me. I actually think that the heart of just about every important spiritual tradition on earth is the idea that we don't have to, you're not morally obligated to have your internal attitude reflect depressing external events. That it's okay to keep a positive attitude in the face of adversity. And I think that's a wonderful bit of advice, and I think it's the truth, deep, profound truth, that many of the world's faithful are trying to express and trying to get us to understand. When it becomes used in such a way that it allows people to have faith that God wants me to fly an airplane into a building, I want us to separate the different uses of language here so that when people of goodwill indulge in faith of the good kind, that doesn't also provide license for people of bad will to believe crazy things about how we should treat one another. And I think the best way to do that is to stop using the word faith for things like resolute hopefulness. Let's change the term. by all means, let's form social clubs that promote resolute hopefulness. But let's not endorse the literal truth of books that are full of barbaric prescriptions. We don't have to do that to get what's beneficial from this great insight that the world's religions are trying to teach us.
So perhaps I'll reflect my take on that. Sharing another personal story. Resolute hopefulness. This is sort of the idea of faith. One of the challenges to me in all of that is the difficulty of being resolutely hopeful all the time. When I was in college, I always had to drop out of school because I was clinically depressed, and it was just not possible for me to be. And it was just not possible for me to be resolutely hopeful and smiling and cheerful and all of those things. And so I agree. If faith was just keep a stiff upper lip, whistle while you work, if that was enough, then I would say, let's just say, keep us, let's just, have bumper stickers and
I have to concede, right? We don't actually know whether secular surrogates for religious faith talk actually pack the same functional punch, right?
Yeah.
It's quite possible that if we tried to make the systematic substitution of religious talk with sort of similarly functioning secular talk, that it may not have the same effect. And I'm willing to grant that we don't know that.
Anyway, so that would be my reflecting back. That I think there is something more to faith than just the power of positive thinking. And that because if it was just the power of positive thinking, then I think that's not. It's like, ooh, wow, power of positive thinking. I think we could have come up with that on our own. So
This might be a good point to segue to some of the questions from the audience. And the first question that I see here is connected very much with what you're just saying, and I wonder if I could get all three of you to expand on this. Someone asks, what do you mean by faith? What does the word mean to you? And perhaps we could go in reverse order this time. And Brian, if you would like to give us your definition of the word faith.
So we have, in fact, been talking about it in the discussion we've just been having. Faith, for me, is the belief in propositions that aren't adequately supported by existing evidence. That's essentially what faith is. And for me, I understand the distinction I think that Andy is making between faith as expressed in typical religious devotion versus kind of a secular faith of the type that I was talking about when I was talking about this. But in fact, I think those are distinctions of degree and maybe distinctions of moral valence or something. But to me, faith is simply the belief in propositions that aren't completely supported by existing evidence. And I certainly agree that even belief in propositions that are supported by evidence or appear to be can change if the evidence changes. But for me, fundamentally, faith is about how I act when I don't have adequate evidence. And
Yeah, I think a big part of the problem here is that the concept of faith is so overburdened. It's used in so many different ways. And it really needs disambiguation. We need to tease apart its different functions. I'll second Brian's definition, but I think more important than any definition is to attend to the function that faith talk plays. And again, I'm very, very sympathetic to many people's use of faith talk to encourage one another, to help people fend off despair. All of those things are fine. My best guess is that we can do that without using either the word faith or the idea of a supernatural being. I don't know that. I think we ought to experiment with that. We ought to look seriously at that possibility because, as I pointed out, there's increasingly large body of scientific evidence that we might all actually be more humane to one another if we discard some of the more dogmatic and inflexible kinds of faith that are out there. So I would encourage everyone to pay attention to when people's use of faith talk is actually telling you, I don't need to be accountable. Or if somebody cites faith in order to excuse themselves from the kind of accountability that we demand of one another in every other area of our lives, that's where you should get suspicious. And say, you know what? I don't approve of your exempting yourself from the fundamental norm that allows people to live with one another humanely and amicably. Look, this is perhaps the most important norm at the heart of civilization. If you can give me a sufficiently good reason, I will yield. People who don't embrace that norm are only partially civilized. And to celebrate faith as a belief in defiance of the evidence is basically to say, I refuse to fully accept that norm. If you do that, if you allow that to change, to function in that way, you are not promoting the cause of a more civilized future.
I like that idea of the contrast between faith as what one does in the absence of evidence versus faith as what one does in contradiction to evidence. I think that's a really important distinction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I agree that there are a plurality of different ways that we use faith, and I don't know that even when I use faith that I'm always using it in just one way. You know, sometimes I do use it in the way that you mentioned of, just, faith is certainty in the light of incomplete evidence. And, but I think, if I got down to the core and I said if I had to choose just one, that I could only use one for the rest of my life, it would be what I said earlier, which is that faith for me is faith to act. Because, for me, the place where doubts in indecision and lack of evidence become the most paralyzing are when I have to make a decision, I have to do something, and I know that if I'm wrong, it's going to be very bad. And yet I don't know for sure what the right decision is. And for me, faith of some kind is the thing that's necessary to overcome paralysis in that situation.
The second question, also for all three of our presenters, it's really a personal question about your own biographies. Was there a moment in your life when the higher things or the higher questions in the world just started to make more sense to you? When was it? What caused it? And have your views developed from that point? And not to give any order to it, anyone who wishes to respond can begin, but this person is asking that of all three of you.
Well, maybe I'll start again. I'll just say that that I don't know that. So I think that the kernel of the question is sort of when did the concepts of higher powers or something like that make more sense? Is that kind of? So I think what I would have to say is that the progress of my thinking has gone in kind of the opposite direction. As I've thought more about it, I've found it to be more difficult to understand. Not difficult to believe that or difficult to accept that people can have strong faith in a higher power or in a loving God or something like that, but difficult in my own faith journey, if you will, to understand what function a higher power or a personified God or something like that actually serves. And so in that sense, I progressed away from a fairly simple view to a view of questioning and learning.
I guess I remember a point in college where I was trying to figure out what I stood for as a human being. And I don't remember how I got there, but I ended up concluding that dialogue is almost invariably a positive thing. And I sort of decided at that point that I was going to just dedicate myself to promoting more constructive dialogue among people. And that's what I try to do when I teach philosophy. And I think that resolution, that act of faith, that leap of faith, if you like, has led me, has been good for me. I get to feel good about myself having made that choice.
Again, I guess there's lots of aspects of the question. I also feel a little bit uncomfortable with the idea that the higher questions have started to make more sense to me because it makes me seem like I'm sort of this wise, all-knowing person, and that's certainly not. I certainly think that the more that I explore these questions, the more I learn how complicated they are and how rich and varied and nuanced the different positions on these things are. And it certainly hasn't been certainly my thoughts on this haven't been closing off doors and saying, okay, well now that's answered. Now that, as much as I'm a scientist and I'd like to think, okay, well that's answered, that's answered, that's answered, that's answered. That's not necessarily how these things work. But maybe I will answer, as opposed to just weaseling out of the question entirely. I will say that there was a point in my life where, as much as I didn't necessarily have answers to questions, the questions gained greater significance for me. So I can say that when I was in college, I would not have been at this Veritas forum because it just wouldn't have. I would have been out playing Ultimate Frisbee, or doing something else that's. So something else that would have seemed more significant to me than this. And it wasn't until I was in graduate school that things changed for me, and these questions began to have greater significance and become something that I really wanted to think about. So some of you may be graduate students, some of you may be undergraduates, some of you may be other stages in life, but certainly there has been a progression in my life in terms of deciding which things are actually important to me.
Our final three questions are addressed individually, and fortunately we have one per person, so it's going to work out just great. First for Troy, what do you do with miracles? How do science and faith interact here?
So there I can share, I think, a very personal example of that. Because, okay, so first of all, there are lots of examples of miracles in the Bible and in the Christian tradition outside of the Bible. And I think there is something of a misunderstanding of what a miracle means. So a miracle doesn't mean that there is no possible mechanistic scientific interpretation of what has happened. There can very well be scientific mechanistic explanations of things. You could say, Moses parted the Red Sea. Well, was there an earthquake, that caused that to happen? A scientific, that would be a mechanistic explanation. It would still say it's highly unlikely that someone would walk up to the edge of the sea and there would be an earthquake at right that moment that would cause the waters to part. And so it wouldn't, just because there's a mechanism wouldn't make it a non-miracle. It doesn't have to be something that completely abrogates the laws of nature. And in my own life, I would say that the same is true. So when my son, whose name is Peter, when he was 3 months old, he was diagnosed with an incurable blood disorder. So his immune system had recognized his red blood cells and his platelets as pathogens and was killing them off systematically. And so he was having hemorrhaging, and he was not getting enough oxygen, and he had to have blood transfusions, and they tested his bone marrow and various things. And the doctors had to tell us the disappointing news that he was never going to get better, that they could do palliative things, they could suppress the immune response so that he could have a relatively normal life, but he was never not going to be like this. And when he was 1, they weaned him off the medication to see if he would stabilize a little bit on his own, because the medicine was not very good for him. And my son is 2 now, and he no longer has an immune response to his own platelets and red blood cells. And it's not because the doctors were able to do anything to make that they know of to make him better. It just happened. And now there may be a medical explanation that nobody knows. It's very unlikely. They've said, we don't understand it. This doesn't happen. They'd prepared us for a long trek. And even if somebody gave me the medical explanation, I would still say, for me, that was a miracle. And there's nothing that's going to take away that interpretation of events for me, because for me it was, having that happen to my son was obviously more significant than just sort of the hypothetical that it could have happened.
And for Andy, this is a little long, so you'll have to pay attention here. After the period of relaxed religiosity in the 18th century to which you referred, an atheistic French Revolution led to the reign of terror and the dictator Napoleon. Doesn't this suggest that the lack of strong religion can also cause terrible wars and atrocities?
It's a nice question. I think that religion has no monopoly on atrocity. There are many doctrinaire secular views that can, I'm thinking of the ideologies of Mao and Pol Pot and Stalin. These were bad secular ideologies. But I think it's a mistake to assume that when God belief, when atheism sets in, people become bad people. I know lots of wonderful people who don't believe in God. And I don't know much about the history of the French Revolution, but it seems to me atheists are capable of being bad people too. It's simply divesting oneself of belief in God is certainly no guarantee that one will become a good person. I don't mean to claim anything like that. In fact, I call myself a humanist rather than an atheist because I think it's terribly important to embrace a set of positive values, such as the inherent worth and dignity of all people. I want people to know what I stand for, not just what I stand against.
And for Brian, how does a Unitarian logically explain the idea of individually constructed theology? Can't there be only one universal truth? I don't think a pun is intended there in the word universal.
I was working on it.
What about that idea of a universal truth?
Well, I think this goes, again, back to the thing that we've circled back to over and over again, which is this idea of faith. The truths that I know to be universal are the truths that are based on sufficient evidence. In every other case where there isn't sufficient evidence, sufficient objective evidence, sufficient agreement among people who have looked at evidence, we really do make our own decisions about what we will do next, what we have faith in doing next. And it isn't so much an issue of explaining how that could be. That simply is. We process information individually. We do it every day. Every one of the 400 people in this room is processing individually the information you're getting from me, and from Andy, and from Troy. We always construct our own interpretation of our world. And the notion of an individual theology sounds very fancy in those fancy words, but it is in fact what we do every day when we think about our place in the universe and our attitude toward faith and our attitude toward a higher power or anything like that. It isn't, how could we not? How could we not?
Well, it's time for our closing statements. And the folks in the back room here have just asked me a question that you might want to address in the closing statement. Sorry about that, because if you had one prepared, this may change it. Or you could just ignore this question if you want. That's fine. It's completely up to you. But if you wish to address it in your final 2-minute statements, and they're going to return to the podium for their closing statements, what evidence do you base your beliefs on? Or why should anyone else believe your worldview is true? If you care to address that in your closing statement, that'll be fine. And I think we'll just go with the same order we had before. You can just ignore that question if you wish.
Okay, I'll see here. Because I'm torn, because I have something I was going to... Because I wanted to close by asking you guys a question, but I could also try to answer that. I don't know. I don't know what I should do.
Have faith.
Have faith.
Hang in there. So I think I will weasel out of that question. I'll say why I'm going to weasel out, because I mean I'm not necessarily here to try to convince you to hold my worldview. It's not. This isn't a sales pitch. I mean, I'm a teacher. That's what I do for a living, and so I'm here just trying to explain and to teach. And my hope is that you guys have learned something out of that. Not that I'm, and that that this may teach you something and lead you somewhere. But in terms of just saying, well, giving the, bang the podium sales speech about why you should have my worldview isn't very satisfying to me. I don't think it would lead to a good discussion. So anyway, so I'm going to weasel out of that. Instead, I would like to close by asking you guys a question. So since you guys got to ask me a lot of questions, or at least a couple of questions here. And if I had known the technology was here, I would have done it with the the enter in your response question. Because my question is this: we're here at a Veritas forum, which is supposed to be about seeking truth. And my question to you is, why are we seeking the truth? What is our motivation in all of this? Because I can come up with a bunch of motivations, which would have been the options I would have put on the slide. I could say, well, we might be seeking truth for personal gain. Power, prestige, we can make more money, people will recognize us. Or we might be seeking the truth, anticipating the joy of proving someone else wrong. Or we might be seeking truth out of innate curiosity, but then where does curiosity come from and where is it leading us to? After all, curiosity didn't turn out so well for the cat. Or we might have the altruistic aim of saying we are seeking the truth because it will do good for other people, but how can we trust that the truth will actually do good for people? How do we know it's not harmful? And for me, the Christian response to all of these sort of human desires for seeking the truth are, well, on the one hand, the truth is not guaranteed to bring me any power or respect or glory. The only thing the truth is guaranteed to do is to bring God glory. And in terms of, why I might be looking at truth to prove someone else wrong, I should be very careful with that, because most of the time I find when I discover the truth, the one person who is always wrong is me. And curiosity is a good a good innate motivation. And for me, curiosity is one of the things that points toward God, because it is the echo of his voice in me, the motivation to seek truth. And so the one thing that I'm left with is the motivation of seeking the truth to help other people. And this is, I think, very powerful, because this is one of the reasons that science got started in the first place, because in a Christian worldview, we have a reason to think that the truth will lead to good and peace, goodness and peace and joy and freedom, because the truth derives from a God who embodies all of those things. So that's why I seek the truth. And as you guys go off to discussion tables in your dorm rooms and coffee houses and what have you, and you talk about the truth, I'm going to encourage you not just to talk about what you are looking for, but why you are looking for it. All right, that's all.
So is faith a friend, or is faith a true friend to humanity? I want to ask a set of rhetorical questions here and encourage you to answer them yourself, if not immediately, then in the days and months ahead. What kind of friend is demonstrably unreliable? And even if you think your faith leads you to the truth, faith as a method of fixing belief has got to be wrong more often than it's right, at least given that all the faiths that claim to have an exclusive on the truth. What kind of friend employs blatantly manipulative and emotionally abusive tactics to enforce adherence? You're going to go to hell if you think for yourself. That's not a true friend. What kind of friend pretends to know things that we can't possibly know? What kind of friend demands unquestioning obedience? What kind of friend divides humanity into mutually irreconcilable tribes that have warred against each other for thousands of years? What kind of friend flaunts the norm that has always allowed friendly folks to resolve their differences amicably? You give me a better reason, I will yield. What kind of friend protects morally backward teachings, like homosexuality is an abomination, from humane revision? What kind of friend breeds ignorance, superstition, intolerance, and women's oppression, and has for thousands of years? What kind of friend postpones moral progress for a millennium? I think any honest, fair-minded assessment of faith will find that it is at best a two-faced friend. And I implore all people of goodwill, religious and irreligious, to confront this friend and hold him accountable.
So I expressed a couple of beliefs toward the end of the slide presentation I gave. One belief was that we all have a need for love, to love and to be loved. And another belief that I hold is that we all have the need for stories, to tell stories and to be told stories. It's something that wasn't in the slides and that I think has really emerged from this discussion, at least in my mind, is that I think I want to distinguish faith with a capital F from faith with a lowercase f. And I think Andy's been arguing very strongly about a certain kind of faith with a capital F. And I want to talk a little bit about faith with a lowercase f, or maybe it's lowercase half uppercase. We all have to have faith. I'm not saying it's a good idea to have faith. I'm not saying you're bad if you don't have faith. I'm saying it is a logical necessity to have faith. There are myriad situations from the moment you wake up in the morning until you go to bed at night, whether you go to church, whether you don't go to church, you are acting in faith on less than dispositive evidence. We all have to have faith. You get to choose what kind of faith you have. In any of those situations, one of the great privileges of being a human being is that you get to choose. You get to choose your faith. You get to form your faith in whatever way you want. As intelligent, well-educated human beings, you should make that choice. You should make good use of that choice. You should think hard about what faith means to you, where faith plays a role in your life, and where, if you will, scientific deduction, prediction, planning plays a role in your life. This is something that's never ending. The first question was, what evidence did you use to decide about your faith, the first of the warm-up questions? My first reaction was the tense of that question is wrong. The tense should be present tense. What evidence do you use? As you go through life, you'll see different evidence. Some of it very clear, some of it not clear. You'll be changing your views on faith from now until the day you die. It's very important for you to decide what faith means for you. Thank you.
Thanks again to all of our participants for a stimulating nearly 2 hours of discussion. And we're ready for our MC to tell us what happens next.
All right. I think that was great, really thought-provoking. Can we please give another hand to all of our 3 speakers and our moderator?
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.